you see her tap on the screen. It looks like she's tapping the App Store icon. And so you would want to animate the App Store opening here. So to do that, you would go into your screen track. And remember, this is stretched, so now we need to go into our actual screen layer. And here's where we have our screen. And this is where you would put any animation of the App Store opening. So I'll just do that for fun. I'm going to animate the App Store to scale up. And so by hitting S, we can scale. And so that'll scale our image, but we want it to scale from the App Store. So what we want to do is adjust this anchor point here. This is anchored in the center, but if I click this center piece, you'll see it's moving the image around. So what I need to do is use the anchor point tool. That's just A. You also want to hit Y. And now Y, that's our pan behind anchor point tool. So now we can move our anchor point right on the center of the App Store logo. So now, if I hit S again and we scale, it'll scale from the App Store. So I want to animate this, and I can do that just by clicking the little stopwatch here. So we want to start it at its normal size, and then later in the timeline, we want it to be scaled way up, because that's the app opening. So we'll see through our timeline now, it scales up. And what I like to do is refine this animation a little bit. It's a little too linear. It starts very fast. I'd like to ease into it. And so if I click on this keyframe and I right click, I can go Keyframe Assistant and Easy Ease Out. So that'll smooth out the opening animation. It might be a subtle difference, but in motion graphics it does make a big difference, and it looks much nicer. So now that it's scaling up, I also want it to fade out while it scales up. So that's going to be animating the opacity, and so that's T under opacity. And I'm hitting all these hotkeys to find these, but if you just drop down this little arrow here and under transform, all these options are available to you. So I'm working on my opacity right now. You can see my scale keyframes are here. So I want to have my opacity start at 100%, and as it scales up, I want it to fade out, so I'm going to bring my opacity down. And so since I have the stopwatch highlighted, it's automatically creating these keyframes. So as it scales, it fades out. And I also want it to be more centered, so I'm also going to animate the position a little bit. So I'll create my position keyframe, I'll go to the end, and I'll move that position more centered. So now that App Store is opening a little more centered. And just like with the scale, I want to easy ease this first keyframe. So Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease Out. And that's looking really nice. So now that it's faded out, we can reveal whatever's underneath it. Right now there's nothing. So I'll just create, I'll bring in another image here. So I've gotten my image from the internet, and I'll just drag it right in. You can drag it right into your composition, and it'll automatically import into your project panel. So this is pretty small, so I'm going to scale it up, and that's just S. So with this scaled up all the way to the edges here, this will now show up. But what we want to do is we want to put this underneath the home screen so that when the home screen layer fades, it reveals the App Store underneath. And something else iPhones do that I want to also have is the App Store image would scale with this home screen. So what I want to do is I want to link this App Store background to the animation that I've made in my home screen. And I don't have to recreate all those keyframes. I can actually just parent it by using this swirly here. I can drag the App Store image to the home screen image, or the home screen layer, and now you can see it's parented to those keyframes. And so as it scales, the home screen follows. Now I'm seeing this white box appear. I just want to mask that out, and I can do that with my rectangle tool here, and I'll just drag a mask around. Make sure you have your layer selected. And you can double click on your mask to transform it a little more. So I'm happy with that. I'll hit enter, and let me watch back my animation. Yeah, I quite like that. I think the last thing I want to do is just ease in, because it's kind of landing a little hard here. So I'll expand my home screen so I can see all my keyframes. And just with all of these, I'm going to select all the keyframes, right click, Keyframe Assistant, and easy ease in, because we want to ease into this keyframe. So we've eased out of the first one and eased into the last one. So I think that looks pretty nice. Maybe I'll have it open a little faster, and all that is dragging these keyframes earlier in the timeline so that it hits that final position faster. Great, let's see how that looks in our main composition. That's pretty good. It looks like the one thing we missed is we want it to open right when she taps. So it looks like the thumb taps right on this frame. So if we go back to our screen layer, our playhead stays on that frame that we just selected. So I'm going to bring my starting keyframes over to start on that correct frame, and I'll also drag over my ending keyframe so it's not too fast. So let's see how that looks. Pretty good. And there's a couple little issues I'm seeing here. I'm seeing this green box appear, which is just something I made in the screen track layer, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that, and I'll delete my gray layer. So I'm going to refine this mask a little bit more, and instead of just using my square tool, I'll use my pen tool, and I can have a lot more control. Oops. I can have a lot more control over my mask edges here. So if you click and drag, that'll round out the edges, which I want to do for these corners here. And I'll just go ahead and trace the edge of my phone, putting 2 anchors per corner, making sure they're rounded. And just be careful not to click on your other mask. Honestly, I would delete it so that doesn't accidentally happen. And this is a tricky part here. And there we go. So I've added the mask, but it's not doing anything because we have this rectangle mask still. So select that one. If you're not seeing these, just hit M with your App Store layer selected, and I'll delete the green mask. So now it's only being masked by the one I just drew. And another thing I want to do is soften the edges of my mask just a little bit. So I can expand my mask settings and increase my mask feather to about 10. 10 seems a little much. I'll try 5. And another thing that helps is you can turn on motion blur, and since we have these keyframes, it'll automatically motion blur it properly for you. So what we want to do is hit this toggle switches modes down here, and this will bring up a couple more options. And so these 3 dots here, let me collapse these. So the first of these 3 boxes here is the motion blur box, and you can see now that I've turned that on, we're seeing some motion blur because it's in the middle of this motion. So if I play this out, I'm feeling a lot better about that. And again, I want to put a white background behind that, so I'm going to make a new solid, making sure it's white, and putting that at the very bottom. So now that feels a little more natural. And it just takes a little bit longer to load now that we have the motion blur on there. But let's go back to our main and let's see what we've got. Great, that's looking really nice.